As most predicted, Michael Chandler came up short in his rematch with Charles Oliveira, losing a decision on Saturday night in a fight that was fairly one-sided other than the 5th round. But then you add in the illegal strikes to the head. I know a lot of people are not happy with Michael Chandler, and that's kind of been the sentiment overall with fans. But I have a couple ideas on what I think should be next for Chandler. And let's start at the top of the list. And to me, what should be next is him out of the UFC rankings. So if you look at the rankings right now, Michael Chandler, for the last couple of years, has been holding up a spot at the number 7 spot in the rankings. You guys know my view on this. I think if you're a fighter who has been inactive for a year, even if that's with an injury or other things going on, you should be removed from the rankings. We should be rewarding activity for the fighters that are competing often. So Chandler's taken up a spot. Get him out of the rankings. Right now, if you look on Chandler's resume, he only has 1 ranked win at this point, and that was back in 2021 over Dan Hooker. And I think, honestly, if they rematch right now, Hooker probably wins that fight. Maybe he doesn't. But either way, 1 ranked win over his entire UFC career. That's not enough for me to keep him in the rankings at this point. So let's get Michael Chandler out of there and let's start promoting some other fighters that have been doing quite well and been more active. So that's the first thing. The second thing, a lot of people are asking what should be next. Now, I'm of the belief that while Chandler, some people feel like whether he deserves this or not, Chandler should get the Conor fight. But I don't know if Conor's going to come back. So, Chandler, it really does seem like he's not done. There was no talk of retirement. I've said this before. Chandler could retire. He's had a pretty good career as it is, with Bellator being the champ, and he's made a lot of money, and he's got a lot going on. So I don't think, this idea that, people said that Chandler's wasting his prime. Chandler's 38 years old. The last fight before this one was back in 2022. He wasn't in his prime when he was in the UFC. I'd argue he was in the prime when he was in his early 30s, even when he made his UFC debut. If you look at it there, how old was he there? He would have been, 34. So again, guy's 34. He's not really in the prime of his career. So I'm not of that belief. I think Chandler could retire and go off into the sunset, no big deal. But we know he doesn't want to retire. So I'd say option number 1 is Conor. And I think, people say that he lost. That doesn't mean that he should be fighting Conor next. I disagree. Conor's not exactly on a win streak himself. I actually think this is a fight that, since we just saw Chandler fight, I think that's a fight that Conor could potentially win if he does come back. And to me, what you don't want to do is get Conor another loss. And I think, honestly, after seeing how one-sided the fight was against Oliveira, I think Conor probably does win that fight. But maybe he doesn't. It doesn't matter, though. Either way, I'm of the belief Conor should be first. But I got to give credit to my guy Dan Levy. He came up with a great idea as well, because I think the McGregor fight probably doesn't happen. It just does not seem like Conor's coming back. Dana keeps saying, oh, it's going to be in September. Oh, it's going to be this. Oh, it's going to be early next year. Oh, it's going to be late next year. I don't know. I'm not relying on it. I'm tired of talking about Conor. We've gone through this for the last couple of years. I think the fight that makes sense is something that Dan recommended. Sign Eddie Alvarez for 1 fight and let Chandler finish their trilogy. Now, I know there's been some rumblings about Alvarez doing some BKFC stuff. That's fine. But I think this makes a lot of sense. And here's why. If you bring Alvarez back, Chandler and Alvarez, it has nothing to do with the rankings. Not that they follow the rankings very well anyways, but it doesn't affect anything that's going on in the division. It's like a one-off fight. Because I've heard people talk about Chandler and Max Holloway. And yes, that's a fun fight, but I think Max Holloway probably wins that. And honestly, I think after what Max Holloway, what he did earlier this year to Justin Gaethje, Holloway honestly deserves a better opponent at this point. Am I wrong here? Like, as much as that fight would be fun between Chandler and Holloway, I think Holloway probably wins that. And I'd rather see Holloway in a more competitive fight. So that's where I would rather see Holloway fight. Like, maybe he puts the BMF title up against Poirier or something. I don't know, but I would like to see Holloway fight someone other than Chandler. And I feel like Chandler's already been given so many opportunities. I mean, just even think of the fact that Chandler, coming into this fight, was on he's lost 3 of his last 4, and they still gave him a number 1 contenders fight against Oliveira. Like, if he had knocked out Oliveira, which looked like it was close to happening on Saturday, he'd be fighting the winner of Arman and Islam. Like, do people not remember that? So, and that's what Dana White said, whether he deserved it or not. Dana White was the one who came out and said, hey, this is a number 1 contenders fight. So that's why Oliveira most likely going to fight the winner of Arman and Islam. But the reason I like the Alvarez fight is, again, it has no effect on this division. And it gives Chandler someone to fight. I guess the other option you could do with Chandler is you give him an up-and-comer, but do you think Chandler's going to do that at this stage in his career? Probably not. And I don't really see the value in that either. I'd rather see Chandler run it back with Eddie Alvarez. If people have not seen their first fight, his first fight with Eddie Alvarez, maybe my favorite fight of all time. And the reason a lot of people don't talk about it is because that fight also took place the same night as Dan Henderson and Shogun Rua with their amazing fight in the UFC. Why am I not seeing it here? Here we go. 4th round finish, Bellator 58, November 19th, 2011. One of the best fights I've ever seen. It was so good. And you have to remember the context of this at the time for fans who don't know. And I know there's a lot of fans watching this who didn't watch this live or weren't watching MMA back then, but let me give you some context. Eddie Alvarez was considered one of the best fighters outside the UFC. He opted to sign with Bellator at the time. They tried to, well, they did eventually do Roger Huerta and Eddie Alvarez, but that was, basically what happened was they were kind of running out of options for Alvarez at the time. And so Bellator was doing this tournament format where if you won the tournament, you'd fight the number one contender. Chandler was kind of a nobody. Let's be honest here. When he came into Bellator, we knew about his wrestling and stuff, but he was not like a household name. He wins the tournament and he fights Alvarez. And this was one of the successes of Bellator's tournament, was that they made stars from fighters going through the tournament. So you knew who Chandler was by the time he won the tournament. We knew who Eddie Alvarez was. So it was an interesting matchup, and Chandler performed very well to the point of where he submitted Alvarez in the fight. And it was an amazing matchup just from the get-go. Two fighters going at it. If you haven't watched the fight, please go check it out. Now, look, I'm not saying by any means that's going to look anything close. I mean, this fight was in 2011. We're not going to get the same fight in 2024. But what I do like about it is that we would get a fight that has no impact on the division. And again, I think that, it would still be an entertaining fight. It would be something that the UFC could take advantage of, because what are you really getting out of Chandler at this point, right? He's not a contender. The McGregor fight may or may not happen. I'm leaning more towards it won't happen. And, who wouldn't want to see Eddie Alvarez back? I think that's the move here. And, I know Alvarez is older. He's, how old is he now? He's what? He'd be two years older than Chandler. So he's what, 40? He's 40. And I know Alvarez has taken some punishment. He got knocked out by McPerry and bare knuckle and lost a decision there. Not the greatest seeing Eddie Alvarez take more damage, but I think that's fun. I mean, I don't know many people who would not want to see this fight. And again, it has nothing to impact the lightweight division. And this satisfies the fans as well, because what's one of the reasons why people don't like Michael Chandler? And by the way, I don't agree with this. I did a whole video on people being obsessed with Michael Chandler, but one of the reasons they don't like Chandler is because they felt like he skipped the line, right? He only had a couple fights and then he gets the title shot, and fans were not happy about that, right? He beats Dan Hooker and then immediately gets the fight for the title, not realizing, I think a lot of fans don't realize, he had a pretty decorated career in Bellator, and he was like Mr. Bellator. They used to have him in the Dave and Buster commercials. Like, I feel like a lot of people who don't like Chandler never watched his run in Bellator. It was a big deal, him coming over to the UFC at the time. I don't think a lot of people realize that. So I get that there's still hate for Chandler from that. So this should satisfy that, because it does not tie up the division. It does not impact, the Max Holloway, if he wants to use the BMF title. Max can fight someone that I think is a more competitive fight. And again, we get a really, really good kind of old timers fight. And usually I'm against fights like this. Like, you guys have heard me on this channel talk about how I don't want to see Tony Ferguson fight. I don't want to see, Nick Diaz fight again. Like, I'm in that camp, but Chandler's not at that point. I don't think Alvarez is at that point either, where it's like he shouldn't be fighting anymore. So yeah, Chandler, Alvarez, do it on like a pay-per-view opening night card, make it 5 rounds or something if they want. That seems like a pretty big no-brainer. But again, I'll go back to my first point. He's got to be out of the rankings. Like, he should at this point. Again, I know he beat Dan Hooker, but that was back in 2021. That's a different Dan Hooker than we're seeing today. Dan Hooker is, propelled himself back into contention. So to me, that it doesn't fly, especially when you look at Chandler's overall UFC record. He's what? 2-4 now. That shouldn't be a ranked opponent at this point. And granted, all these guys are good, but I'm just saying that now's the time to kind of take him out of the rankings at this point. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you think this is the fight to make? If you want to see Chandler fight someone else, let me know. I know people want to see like Dariush and Fiziev, but what's the point? Even if Chandler wins those fights, he's not going to get a title shot. He's not going to go on any kind of type of run. He's too old. So let's do something a bit more fun, right? Do you want to see Chandler fight an up-and-comer? I'm willing to hear that argument, but like I don't know what fight that would be right now. That would be interesting. I think the Alvarez fight is the win there. Like I said, I know Alvarez is probably going to be fighting BKFC. Maybe they do it later. I'm pretty sure Alvarez is a free agent. Just do a 1 fight in the UFC. Let's see what happens. Even if Alvarez wins, who cares? Chandler can retire. Doesn't matter. So that's my move. So let me know in the comments what you think should be next for Chandler, and let me know if you agree with me about him being out of the rankings. Again, I've been pretty pro Chandler here, but now's the time to get rid of the rankings, and that's something I've been pretty consistent with him, is that he should have not been in the rankings. He's been too inactive. We got to start rewarding activity. Let's preach that. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @LynchOnSports. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.